The night Harlan showed up at her door, Mira had a needle in her hand and her teeth clamped down on a dish towel to keep from making a sound. She wasn't expecting anyone. She never was. The apartment on Delancey didn't get visitors. Not the kind who knocked, anyway. The landlord used a key. The guy in 4C slid notes under the door. Everyone else in her life had the good sense to pretend she didn't exist outside of office hours, which was exactly how she preferred it. So when the knock came, 3 times hard, the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission, she thought she'd misheard. She hadn't. Kessler. His voice through the door. Low, not loud. It didn't need to be. Mira didn't move. The needle was still in her hand. The gash along her left thigh, 4 inches, maybe 5, courtesy of a filing cabinet edge that had caught her when she'd slipped on a wet floor at the warehouse 2 days ago, had been bleeding on and off since Tuesday. She'd been ignoring it, which had been working fine until it stopped working fine. And now it was Thursday evening, and she was sitting on the bathroom floor between the toilet and the tub, with a bottle of vodka she wasn't drinking, and a curved suture needle she'd ordered online 3 months ago for reasons she hadn't wanted to examine too closely. "I can hear you breathing," Harlan said. She exhaled slowly through her nose, set the needle down on the folded washcloth she was using as a sterile field, or something close to it, pressed her palm against her thigh and waited. "Open the door, Mira." She'd worked for Deveraux Harlan for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. In that time, she had learned several things about him. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't explain himself. He had a particular way of saying her last name, flat, like a period at the end of a sentence, that made it clear a decision had already been made and her participation was expected, not requested. She'd also learned that he didn't make house calls. That was what made her push herself up off the floor. She got her leggings pulled up, carefully, because the wound was seeping again, and her oversized sweatshirt straightened, and she made it to the front door in under a minute. She didn't look in the mirror. She already knew what she looked like. It wasn't something she needed confirmed. She opened the door. Harlan was still in his work clothes. Dark suit, collar unbuttoned now, tie loosened. Behind him in the hallway stood 2 of his men. She recognized the taller one, Beck, who she'd seen at the West Side offices, but they stayed back, hands loose at their sides, eyes pointed at the floor in a way that had been practiced until it looked natural. Harlan looked at her. She looked back. "You didn't answer your phone," he said. "I was busy, that." His gaze had dropped. Just for a second. Just long enough, she resisted the urge to shift her weight. "It's not a big deal," she said. He didn't say anything. That was the thing about Harlan. He never filled silence the way other people did, never reached for words just to stop the quiet from pressing in. He just let it sit there between them, and somehow that was always worse than if he'd spoken. "I need the Aldgate files," he said finally. "Tonight." Mira blinked. "You came here for the Aldgate files. I came here because you didn't answer your phone." He paused. "And because I need the Aldgate files." She turned around and walked back into the apartment, leaving the door open behind her. It was the best invitation she was going to offer. She heard him come in. She heard the door click shut, and she heard him stop. She knew what he was seeing. The apartment was 400 square feet on a good day. The kitchen and the living room were the same room, separated by a folding table she used as a desk, stacked with folders and annotated printouts, and 3 different colored highlighters arranged by frequency of use. The couch had a blanket on it that doubled as her bedding on the nights she fell asleep working, which was most nights. The single overhead bulb had burned out a week ago, and she hadn't replaced it, so the whole place was lit by a desk lamp and the glow from her laptop. The bathroom door was still open. She saw him look at it. The towel on the floor, the vodka bottle, the washcloth with the needle and the thread laid out on it like she'd been setting a table. "Mira," he said. Different this time, not the period at the end of a sentence version, something else underneath it. "The Aldgate files are on the external drive," she said. She moved to the folding table, pulled open the second drawer, started looking. Green case. There's a full reconciliation in there from the 3rd quarter and 2 drafts of the offshore summary. "Which one do you need?" "Both. Give me a second." How long has it been bleeding? She kept her eyes on the drawer. It's fine. That's not what I asked. Tuesday. She found the drive, held it up without turning around. It's a surface wound. I just needed to close it. He crossed the room. She didn't realize how fast until he was right there, behind her, close enough that she could feel the cold that still clung to his jacket from outside. She turned around and he was already looking down at her leg, at the place on her thigh where the leggings were dark and slightly wet, and his expression didn't change. It never changed, that was the problem. She could never read him. But something in his jaw went tight. "Sit down," he said. "Harlan." "Sit down, Mira." She sat down on the edge of the couch. Not because he told her to. Because she was tired and her leg hurt and she'd been on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes, and the adrenaline of him being here was starting to wear off, leaving something heavier underneath. He crouched down in front of her, looked at her leg, then looked up at her. "You've been working the last 2 days," he said. "Yes, like this. I've had worse. I don't doubt that." He stood, took his jacket off and set it on the chair like he was planning to stay a while. Rolled up one sleeve, then the other. "Show me what you have in the bathroom. I can do it myself." "I know you can." He looked at her steadily. "Show me anyway." She showed him. He examined the supplies with the careful neutrality of a man who had seen a lot of improvised field medicine and was not going to comment on the quality of her setup. He picked up the curved needle, turned it once in the light, set it down, looked at the antiseptic she'd been using, the cheap drugstore kind, and didn't say anything about that either. "I'll get someone here in 20 minutes, he said. "There's a doctor." "No." She said it flat. "No doctors." He looked at her. "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I said so." A long pause, the kind where most people would push back, would list reasons, would tell her she was being irrational. Harlan just looked at her like he was reading a column of numbers and waiting to find the one that didn't add up. "Sit on the edge of the tub," he said finally. "I'll need better light." "You're not Mira." He said her name differently again, quieter. "Sit down." She sat. He worked without ceremony and without conversation, which she appreciated more than she knew how to say. His hands were steady, steadier than hers had been, which she found both reassuring and quietly embarrassing. He cleaned the wound properly, the way someone did when they'd been taught how rather than how someone did when they'd looked it up online at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sting made her breath catch twice. He noticed both times and slowed down without acknowledging it, which somehow made it easier to bear. "You need 4 stitches, he said. "I know. That's what I was doing when you knocked. You were going to do this alone." "Yes." He was quiet then. "Why didn't you say anything?" "At the office. Because it's not your problem." He tied off the second stitch with the same flat efficiency he brought to everything else. "You work for me." "I know I work for you. That's not the same as it being your problem." "In my organization," he said, not looking up, "when someone who works for me is injured, it becomes my problem." "I'm not injured. I needed a couple stitches. You were going to suture yourself on the floor of a bathroom the size of a closet with a vodka bottle and a needle you ordered from the internet. It was a medical supply site." He looked up at her then, and for a moment, just a moment, the space of a single breath, something moved across his face that she didn't have a name for. Not pity. She'd seen pity plenty, and she knew how to close herself off from it. This was different, heavier. He looked back down and kept working. "You're going to tell me this is normal for you," he said. She hesitated. "I've managed fine. I know you have." He tied off the third stitch. "That's the part I'm having trouble with." She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing. When he finished, he dressed the wound properly. He'd had Beck bring up a bag from the car that turned out to have actual medical supplies in it, which she wasn't going to think too hard about, and he told her not to walk on it more than necessary and to change the dressing in the morning. He said it the same way he told her things at the office, like it was logistics, like it was numbers in a column. Then he stood up and looked at the apartment again. She watched him look at it. The desk buried in work, the burned-out overhead bulb, the blanket on the couch, the single mug on the counter that hadn't been washed, the empty refrigerator she knew he could see from where he stood, the shoes lined up by the door with the left one, re-soled where the original rubber had worn through. She wanted to tell him it wasn't what it looked like. She didn't, because she didn't know what it looked like to him, and also because she was tired of explaining herself to people who had already made up their minds. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. 2 years. The whole time you've worked for me?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, your salary is—" "I know what my salary is," she said. "I process payroll." Another pause. "Then this isn't about money." She looked at him, at the expensive suit jacket on her folding chair, at the man who ran 3 city blocks worth of organized crime with the same calm expression he brought to reviewing quarterly projections, who had just spent 40 minutes on her bathroom floor doing something she hadn't asked him to do and hadn't known how to refuse. "It's an address," she said finally. "I needed an address in the city for the job. This one works. Where were you before this?" The question was quiet. No pressure in it, just asked. She looked at her hands, at the callus on her right index finger from holding a pen for too many years, at the thin silver scar along her knuckle from a different time she'd handled something herself that she probably shouldn't have. "I was somewhere else," she said. "It doesn't matter." He didn't push. She'd expected him to push. He didn't. "You can take the rest of the week," he said instead. "I'm fine to come in tomorrow. I'm not asking." He picked up his jacket. "The Aldgate files, I'll take the drive. You can brief me Monday on the offshore summary." She blinked. "You came here tonight for files you're not going to look at until Monday." He paused at the door. His back was to her for a moment, and she watched the slight shift in his shoulders, the way he stood in her doorway, like a man who had come for one thing and found something else entirely, and was in the process of adjusting his accounting for it. He turned around. "I came because you didn't answer your phone," he said. "And you live alone in this building, and you work too many hours, and you've been bleeding for 2 days without telling anyone." She stared at him. "That's my problem," he said, "because you work for me." She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she could. He reached into his jacket pocket, set a card on her folding table. "Plain white, just a numbers. If something happens, if anything happens, you call that number first. Not an ambulance, not a hospital. That number." "The money," he said. "Whatever you're doing with it, saving it, sending it somewhere, whatever the reason is that you're living like this while drawing the salary you're drawing, that's your business." "I won't ask." She felt something move in her chest, something she didn't want to examine. "Thank you," she said, because she had to say something. He nodded once, opened the door. "Monday," he said. 8 o'clock. Don't be late." "I'm never late. I know." He glanced back at her, and his expression was still controlled. Still the same careful blankness he wore to every meeting, but his eyes were doing something different. Something she was going to spend the rest of the weekend thinking about whether she wanted to or not. That's the other part I'm having trouble with. Then he left. She sat in the quiet of her apartment for a long time after the sound of the elevator faded. The desk lamp buzzed softly. Somewhere outside, a car horn went twice and then stopped. She looked at the card on the table, at the white rectangle of it, the single number, the weight of what it meant that he'd had it in his pocket to begin with. She pressed her palm against her thigh. It didn't hurt the way it had. She didn't sleep well that night, which was nothing new, but the reason was different. Usually it was numbers that kept her awake, projections and discrepancies, and the quiet arithmetic of whether she was going to be okay. Not a different kind of arithmetic entirely, not the specific weight of a man's hands, steady and unhurried in the bad light of her 400-square-foot apartment. Not the way he'd said "that's my problem," like he was recording a fact and not making a choice. She got up at 5:30, made coffee, looked at the card. She didn't call the number. She didn't have a reason to. She thought about calling it anyway. She didn't. Monday morning, she was at her desk at 7:45. The Aldgate summary was revised and printed in 2 copies, the way he preferred. Her leg ached dully, but the wound was clean, and she'd changed the dressing the way he'd said, and she wasn't limping or not noticeably. He came in at 8 exactly, the way he always did. He stopped at her desk. She looked up. He looked at her leg, then at her face, then at the files she had laid out for him. He picked them up. "Good morning, Kessler," he said. "Good morning." He started walking toward his office. At the door, he stopped without turning around. "Thank you for coming in." She blinked. In 2 years, 4 months, and now 14 days, he had never thanked her for coming in. She came in. That was the job. That was the arrangement. There was no thanks in it. "Of course," she said. He went into his office. She sat at her desk and looked at her computer screen for a moment, before her brain came back online and she started working. The numbers were the same numbers they always were. The columns added up the same way. The work was the same work. But something had shifted in the accounting. Some entry that hadn't been there before, that she couldn't quite categorize, that didn't fit neatly into any of the existing columns. She was still trying to figure out what to call it when his voice came through the office door, not raised, not urgent, just even and certain the way it always was. Mira. First name, not the period at the end of a sentence version. The other one. She got up and went in. He was standing at the window. The city spread out behind him, grey and awake and indifferent. He had the Aldgate file open in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. "Sit down," he said. "I want to go through this together." She sat down. He pulled a chair to the same side of the desk as hers. Something he'd never done, always before keeping the desk between them like a border on a map, and set the file down between them and said, "Walk me through the offshore discrepancy. Start from the beginning." She started from the beginning. His shoulder was 6 inches from hers. She was aware of it the entire time. She kept her voice even and her hands still, and she walked him through every number with the same precision she always brought to it. And she did not think about Thursday night, or the card on her table, or the way he'd said "that's my problem" like he'd looked at the ledger and made a decision he wasn't going to revisit. She thought about it a little. He asked good questions. He always asked good questions. That was one of the things about him, the thing she hadn't expected when she'd taken the job, that under the coldness and the control there was a mind that moved fast and caught things most people would have slid past. He caught everything. He always had. She'd stopped being surprised by it somewhere around month 3 and started being grateful instead, the way you were grateful for a tool that did exactly what it was supposed to. When they finished, he closed the file. He didn't move to his side of the desk. "The rent," he said. She looked at him. "What about it? Your building. The lease on that unit is month to month." He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Flat, factual, like he was reading from a document. "There's a building on Calloway Street, 3rd floor. The unit's been empty for 2 months. It belongs to an LLC I use for property management. There's no rent. It's sitting there." She stared at him. "The square footage is 800, he said. "It has a window that faces south. The overhead lighting works. You looked up my lease. I looked up your building, Harlan." She heard her own voice. Careful, controlled, the voice she used when she was deciding how to respond to something she hadn't prepared for. It's not a favor." He met her eyes. "It's a resource that's going unused. You're a resource I can't afford to have operating at reduced capacity because of a living situation that makes it harder for you to function." She looked at him for a long moment. The room was quiet. The city outside the window kept moving, indifferent. "You're telling me this is about the Aldgate files," she said. "I'm telling you it's about resource allocation." That's a very specific way to phrase it. Something moved in his expression, just slightly, the edge of something he was keeping back. "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at her hands, at the silver scar on her knuckle, at the place where 2 years of working for Deveraux Harlan had left their own marks, the callus from the pen, the tension in her right shoulder from the way she sat at that desk, the particular kind of exhaustion that came from doing good work for someone who noticed it, and never quite said so until Thursday night in her bathroom, when he tied off the 3rd stitch and said, "That's the part I'm having trouble with." "I'll think about it," she said. "That's acceptable." She stood, picked up her copy of the Aldgate summary, moved toward the door. "Mira," she stopped. "Thursday," he said, behind her, his voice doing the quiet thing again, the thing she was going to have to develop a defense against. If something like that happens again, you call the number. She turned enough to see him. He was still standing by the desk. His jacket was off. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled to the forearm, the same way they'd been Thursday night, and she was aware that she was cataloguing this, storing it, adding it to an accounting she hadn't intended to keep. "Okay," she said. "Not okay eventually," he said. "Not okay if it gets bad enough. You call first." "I said okay, Harlan." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded. She turned and went back to her desk. She sat down, opened a new spreadsheet, started a new column, unlabeled, because she didn't have a name for it yet. She'd figure out what to call it later. She was good at that. She was good at making the numbers make sense eventually, at finding the category for the thing that didn't fit, at being patient with an entry until it revealed what it actually was. She typed a number in the first cell. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, loud and grey and going. Inside, something in the accounting had changed, and she was beginning to suspect it wasn't going to change back.